Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. Sorry I'm running a little bit late. My was trying to update Windows on my other computer, and it will not let me in. So I've had to improvise and move over to my other room, which is not. I'm trying to get it set up. Anyhow, we're here, and I'm ready to go and see what we can do to help you tonight. So the way that these webinars work, you create them with your questions. And that means that no 2 weeks are ever quite alike because we always seem to get into different kinds of themes, if you will. So the way you do that, write your question, is over here on the bottom of the right-hand side of the screen is a chat box. Go ahead and write your question to me there. The only thing that I ask with your question is that you do not click the enter key until the whole question is written out. That means you're not going to be able to write it as paragraphs. You're just going to have to do the enter key right at the end. If you try clicking the enter key during the middle of a question, what happens is it breaks it into multiple questions, which gets hard for me to follow on my side of the screen. Okay, so that's the main thing that I ask. During the webinar tonight, we'll cover a lot of things. I'll probably do some screen shares and show you some information at my Lyme disease information site that can sometimes even be a little bit more in depth than I might discuss here during the webinar. I am creating a recording tonight of tonight's webinar, and as long as it goes okay and we don't have any technical problems, I should have that ready for you tomorrow morning, and I'll send out an email to everyone somewhere around probably 9 to 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time here in Austin to get that out to you. Okay. All right. So take a look at that. If you happen not to get the email, you can find the recording in multiple places. It'll be on my YouTube channel, which you can click at treatlyme.net. There's up on the right-hand corner, right up at the top, is an icon that you can click for the YouTube. Okay. You'll find a copy of it on my Facebook channel, which is facebook.com/treatlyme. You can also find a copy of it on the webinars page at treatlyme.net. That's Treatlyme by Marty Ross MD. And finally, you can find it on the homepage of my supplement store, Marty Ross MD Supplements. Just scroll down towards the bottom. Okay, so there's multiple places to find it. So tonight we're together. We're together again next week, and then I will be taking time off after that. So we've got 2 more here. In September, I am actually relocating back to Seattle. And so I wasn't here last week as I was up trying to make arrangements for my move back there in preparation for trying to reopen my practice, my Lyme disease practice later this year or early next year. So yes, that seems to be going forward at this point. So anyhow, I hope we can get through a lot tonight, and I hope we can get through a lot next week, but then I'm going to need to take a month off just to get myself from here to there. All right. So anyhow, there you are. So why don't we go ahead and get started here? We'll take our first question here. Oh, it looks like we got a Basenji roaming in the back there. That's one of my dogs. There's actually 2 of them. All right. So I should have mentioned this earlier too. During the webinar, what I'll try to do is actually post your questions on the screen so that you can see them at the bottom. I will read those questions though, and the reason that I will wind up reading those questions is that they don't seem to show up in the recorded version. Okay? All right. So this first one is from John. John says, Dr. Ross, any updates on antabuse? Do you know how long one would have to take antabuse? Also, a congresswoman from New Jersey said in an interview that the Infectious Disease Society is lobbying hard to block any Lyme research. Do you know which corporations are behind this lobbying? What is your general opinion on this anti-Lyme lobbying? So I don't know the corporations that are behind this. Generally, it tends to be more the Infectious Disease Society of America and the groups that went into rewriting their new proposed guidelines. So they have new proposed treatment guidelines that are out getting public comment right now. And that public comment period, as I understand, has just been extended to September 9th to try to bolster their claim that they would be valid guidelines. They are writing those along with a group called the American Academy of Neurology and the American College of Rheumatology, I believe. And then they have representatives from various primary care groups like the family doctors, internists, and pediatricians on their committee. I've read through their proposed guidelines, and they're really problematic. They basically have ignored a lot of the more cutting edge research that shows there's things like persister Lyme. They've ignored research that shows that various kinds of antibiotics can work. They only recommend a handful of them. They basically have just done a really slipshod job again. And because they're hiding behind a lot of different professional societies, it may make it harder for many of us to argue against their guidelines. The biggest problem with their guidelines is they're still only calling for short-term treatment. And that if a person doesn't get better, that they're saying there isn't anything else that can be done with antibiotics. And they're basing that on some four NIH-supported research projects, and I believe one European study. The difficulty with those studies is that, and the problem I have with all of those studies that I think really invalidates the IDSA guidelines, is that those studies were all 3 months and less. All right. And so and there's of the NIH supported studies, 3 of those actually do show there were some benefits in treating for a prolonged period of time. But when we look at how long it takes to get people with Lyme well, it can often take a year, months to a year to even 2 years. So they're basing all of their recommendations on 4 NIH studies and 1 European study that they claim showed that there wasn't benefit of long-term treatment. And the big problem is they weren't done long enough. There's a lot of other problems too, but they weren't done long enough. So their new guideline is very problematic, and there's a lot of groups that are working to try to get it modified. But in some ways, it becomes more of a problem what their previous guidelines were. All right. So that's what I have to say about that. Let's see. Do we have any more information on antabuse? No, we don't. The thing is about antabuse is that there is a proposed research. So there's an idea that antabuse, everyone, let me start over again. Antabuse is a medicine that we traditionally have used for people with alcohol addiction problems. And basically what it does is it blocks an enzyme that breaks, that leads to a bad breakdown of alcohol and makes persons sick, basically, okay? It has been discovered by some researchers that it also would have some activity against persister Lyme. And because of that, one of my colleagues, Dr. Ken Liegner, I believe he's out east somewhere. He's in one of the East Coast states. Ken published a study where he tried using antabuse on a few people in his practice and wrote about what happened with them. And those people generally showed good benefits. Okay, now this is 3 people. Okay, we cannot make claims in medicine about anything based on 3 people, all right? There is a researcher out of Columbia University that is trying to get a study put in place to do a larger study to see if we can get better evidence that antabuse works, okay? What Liegner writes about in his paper about the 3 people in his practice is that generally most of them got better. I think one of them claims that they don't have any symptoms anymore at all, and that it took about up to about 4 months for those improvements, okay? Now, there are other physicians that have been trying to add this into their practice that are reporting some promising results, but we don't have anything in a published form. When I get back into practice again, coming up in later this year, early next year, as I do so, I will likely be trying this with patients after I get a written consent from them to do that, because again, it's not recognized as a standard treatment. But again, it's showing some good promise for treating persister Lyme. For those of you that need more information about that, I actually do have a whole article about it. Let me just show it to you here real quick. Just going to do a quick screen share here. Okay, so this is back on Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD, which is my online Lyme treatment guide. Let's see here. I think we'll take a look at it. I'm going to look into the latest. I think that's where I filed it. Yep. Here's the article. It's called "Is Antabuse the Magic Bullet for Chronic Lyme Disease?" And in here, if you want to read Liegner's paper, I actually have a link to Liegner's paper, okay? And then in terms of the research, I'm trying to remember who the researcher is that's going to be doing the research. Let's see here. Let me see here. I might have referenced it here. Okay, so this item number 3 here is Liegner's research, if you want to read it so you can see the outcomes that he talks about just by reading it yourself, okay? And then in terms of the upcoming research, where is that? Where did I put it here? I thought I put it here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Click on this link. I have it right here. This is about the disulfiram study, and it's being done by Dr. Brian Fallon out of Columbia University. So hopefully with that study, we may get some more information. There we are. Right. I'm having technical problems here today. I'm trying to figure out where all the buttons are on this different computer than I normally use. All right. So I think that covers most of the questions that you had there. Yeah, there we go. All right. Thanks, John. Hello, Sue. Let's see. Thrilled to hear you'll be able to return to practice. Me too. Let's see. Wondering about my seizing up or my inability to walk after lying down, standing, or sitting for any length of time. It's more a muscle stiffening, a rigid nerve spasm rather than a pain. Through the joints do hurt and legs sometimes feel like they will collapse. It takes about 30 seconds to straighten up, and after a few steps, I can move more normally. Does it sound like a back disc issue or Lyme? I'm going to start iproflavone for osteoporosis and trust there are no contraindications with your pulse regimens for Lyme and Bartonella. Many thanks for your fine support. All right. So Sue, I don't know why this is occurring with you. It would actually probably take me doing an exam myself, which obviously I can't do in this kind of a setting. Okay. The thing that I was wondering as I was reading your explanation of what's happening is if there could be some kind of a neurologic issue in your back. That's what you're, I think, asking by the, could it be a disc? This is something that if I were evaluating you in my practice, I probably would wind up looking at trying to see if there would be some evidence by nerve conduction studies possibly, and also by MRIs of your back as to whether those nerves in your back are being pressed on. So I hope that you've been working with your physicians and that they have considered this and have done some studies to look at it as well too. But it'd be difficult for me to say. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Gail. Let's see. Hi. Is Thorne a company you trust for vitamins, minerals, and zinc? What are reliable Lyme tests that are covered by insurance? And are there any contraindications to using L-theanine for sleep? Is facial hair appearance in women a common occurrence in Lyme? All right, let me try to work backwards from there. Okay, so is facial hair appearance in women a common occurrence in Lyme? No, I would not call it common. It can happen, but it can happen even if you don't have Lyme. If you are having issues of facial hair occurrence, I'd suggest asking your physician to help you look at that. Even primary care doctors can help look at whether there could be some metabolic causes of that. Okay, all right. Let's see. Are there any contraindications using L-theanine for sleep? The only thing, so L-theanine, everyone, is an amino acid-like compound that is found in green tea. And it gets absorbed into the body and in the brain. A majority of it is converted into a chemical called GABA, and our brain has a bunch of GABA receptors. Okay, and GABA receptors, if you put something that binds to a GABA receptor, you put more of it on a GABA receptor. What winds up happening is it has a way of inducing sleep or calming somebody way down, and so that's how L-theanine is one of the ways that L-theanine is thought to work. In terms of taking too much, the general recommendations, and this is more, I believe, out of a concern for potential cancer risk, is that you want to limit your daily intake to less than 1,200 milligrams or 12 pills, okay? You don't want to take over 12 pills of L-theanine or 1,200 milligrams total in a daytime, all right? That's the only risk that I am aware of with that, all right? Let's see, Lyme testing that's covered by insurance. Regrettably, most of the Lyme testing that's out there is going to be considered to be experimental by insurance. They do tend to cover Western blot testing, that is done by traditional labs like LabCorp and Quest Diagnostics. Those labs are all using a Western blot test kit that is manufactured by other companies, but those packages are manufactured and approved for distribution and sell by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and all of those follow interpretation and performance guidelines of the Centers for Disease Control, okay? Now, the problem is with that technique of using a Western blot, that method, although it may be useful in somebody with acute Lyme, it is probably not that useful in somebody with chronic Lyme, where we know that system can fail quite a bit. In fact, if we look at those Western blot kits, according to some studies that have been done, they may miss Lyme around 65% of the time, okay? Now, the better way to do a Western blot is to work with an independent lab like IGenex or the State University at New York. SUNY Stonybrook has a Lyme laboratory lab. And what they do is they have their own in-house test kits. So they're not reselling them to other labs to use. And because of that, they don't need FDA approval. Okay, all that the FDA approval means is that they can sell it to somebody else. All right. The fact that they're not FDA approved does not mean they're not valid tests. All right. Now, the reason those tests are better is they look to see, when you're doing a Western blot, we're trying to see, does the immune system make antibodies against certain proteins that are found in the covering of the Lyme germ? And the big difference between the SUNY Stonybrook lab and the IGenex method of doing the Western blot is they're looking to see if you have antibodies against more proteins. Okay, that's the big difference. And they report on more proteins, all right? So it's a bigger fingerprint. If we look at the interpretation criterion of IGenex as well as that of SUNY Stonybrook, what we find is that their way of doing it, at least IGenex in-house studies, suggest that their method can find Lyme when it's present about 80% of the time versus the standard CDC, FDA approved type test kit that can find it if it's there about 60 to 65% of the time. All right. Now, because it's a Western blot test, often insurance companies will still pay for the IGenex test to be done and pay for the SUNY Stonybrook test to be done. Okay. Other Lyme disease testing, like the ELISpot testing, and also another, which ELISpot's a method to see do your T white blood cells react against Lyme. There's also what's called a PCR test. PCR testing is a way of seeing, is there DNA of the germ in your blood? Generally, those are thought to be experimental by insurance companies. The technique is, and therefore they're not going to cover it. But often my experience was when I was still in practice is that the IGenex as well as the SUNY Stonybrook labs, although you may need to pay for them up front to IGenex or to SUNY Stonybrook, that ultimately if you submitted claims to the insurance companies, they would pay for those because the Western blot technique itself is a recognized way of testing for Lyme. Okay? All right. Let's see here. And then Thorne. Thorne's probably one of the better, probably one of the best supplement companies out there. They have done a good job of sourcing their ingredients for very active compounds, and they tend to make their pills with the least amount of artificial fillers and garbage that may hurt a person, okay? And what they say is in their product usually is in their product, okay? And that's a big problem with a lot of supplements that are out there based on some independent studies that have been done, okay? So yes, I trust Thorne. Okay, very good. Thanks, Gail. Good luck to you. Hello, Pat. Let's see how Dr. Ross. Is it possible to take too much magnesium? I'm taking 810 milligrams magnesium citramate daily, broken up into 3 doses. One of my Lyme friends is taking about 1,800 milligrams. We both have had constipation issues, which we've attempted to resolve in all sorts of ways, and hers has cleared up with the extra magnesium. She says Lyme patients tend to need way more magnesium than others. Is it possibly too much magnesium? Good question. So the limiting factor on magnesium is the more you take, the greater chances you have of getting diarrhea. Okay, that tends to be the limiting factor. All right, I'm going to say more about that, more about another concern here in a minute. But so what happens with magnesium, the reason that can lead to loosening stool, which your friend's taking it for constipation, is magnesium in the intestinal tract acts as a big magnet to attract water to it, okay? And so more water is held in the intestines, which loosens up your stool, so you tend not to have constipation. That's how it can be helpful there, okay? All right. And so that is the limiting factor about taking magnesium, basically. Now, there are some studies that suggest that Lyme thrives on magnesium. I have never been a big fan of limiting magnesium based on those supposed studies because it's not clear that that is really what happens in a living person, okay? And also, I take the viewpoint that we can't starve ourselves of things we need just to starve the bacteria too, okay? So generally, I use magnesium in these kind of dosing ranges that you're talking about here with your friend seems reasonable to me. Okay, all right. Those are doses I would have used in my practice. All right. Thanks for the question. Good luck to you. Hello, Rita. Hold on here. I gotta get a little sip of water. Dear Dr. Ross, my 12-year-old daughter was diagnosed with Lyme in October 2017, as well as bartonella, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The only symptom Kristen has manifested is swelling in her knee when first diagnosed and bladder issue, which resolved. Now, within the last month, she is seeing dot spots only on solid surfaces. They do not move. The eye doctor couldn't find anything, and her Lyme doctor just did another round of blood work, which we are waiting the results. Do you have any idea what it could be? I value your expertise and advice. Desperate to help my daughter. Thank you for all you do. Off the top of my head, I don't know what it could be. It could be some kind of a neurologic manifestation of Lyme. It could be some kind of neurologic manifestation of Bartonella, and the key word there is could be. But for me to really give you a more concise answer, I would need to do something I can't do, which is I would want to examine her to look for other neurologic issues going on, and I would want to ask a lot more questions. And so it's difficult for me to say based on the short amount that we can say here. Okay? All right. Good luck. And I'd keep working that out with your physician as well, too. Okay. Hello, Pascal. Let's see. Hi, doctor. My son is 25 now and started getting migraines in his teens. He also has nut allergies. I was wondering if it could be Lyme, as we used to go to Connecticut trials then. He has been tested by regular MDs and MRI, but everything is okay. Thank God. Is under kind of control if he's on a strict keto-like diet. Could this possibly be Lyme? Thanks. So, Pascal, one thing I'm going to suggest that you do is take a look at an article I have about how to diagnose Lyme, okay? It's a half-hour video that goes through the things that we consider when trying to make a diagnosis, all right? Then there's 4 things. One is the symptoms. And you have a greater chance of having Lyme the more symptoms of Lyme that you have, okay? Number 2, we look at, are there any physical exam findings? And often there are not many physical exam findings in somebody with Lyme. Number 3, we look at what are the risks of getting Lyme, and hiking in Connecticut would be a risk. And then number 4, we look at what do the lab tests say, okay? And keep in mind that people can have Lyme and the testing will be negative, even from IGenex and the good labs, about 20% of the time, person can have Lyme and still have negative testing, okay? All right, now, headaches in and of themselves, I have never seen somebody that I would say had Lyme just based on the only symptom of being headaches or migraine, all right? Usually those migraines would occur in conjunction with other type of Lyme disease symptoms, okay? So what I would have you do is take a look at my article about how do you diagnose Lyme, which will give you some things to look at and consider about could it be Lyme. And if you think there's a high probability based on that video, then I would keep rediscussing this with your physicians, okay? All right. So let me just do a quick screen share here. I'll show you that article. Okay, so take a look in the online Lyme guide. Go into the section called How to Diagnose. And click on this article right here, this How to Diagnose Chronic Lyme Disease More Than a Test. Within the video part of this article is a huge symptom list that you can take a look at as well too. Okay? All right. All right, let's see here. And good luck with your son. Hello, Ashley. Let's see. If you receive a positive on the IGenex IgG test, can you confidently say that a person has Lyme? It's a good question. All right, so let's talk about that. I am going to answer it, but I want to give you some background first, okay? So the Western blot is so what Ashley is talking about when she says IgG test, I believe you're talking about the IGenex Western blot test, okay? There's also a Western blot-like test called the immunoblot that is also done by IGenex. So I'm going to make my comments about the IGenex Western blot test because I assume that's what you're talking about. All right, so when we're doing Western blot testing, what we're doing is we're growing what IGenex does is they grow 2 strains of Lyme germs in the lab and they kill them and they take their proteins, okay? And then what they do is they take those proteins and they distribute them along a test strip based on their weight. And then they basically apply antibodies from your blood to the test strip to see if they'll attach to those proteins, all right? All right, and so what we're looking to see is there a pattern on that test strip of antibodies attaching to proteins that suggest Lyme, all right? Now, we test when we do this against 2 families of antibodies. There's a family of antibodies called IgM antibodies, and there's another family of antibodies called IgG antibodies. IgM antibodies are the type of antibodies you develop when you first get an infection, and in all infections, they seem to go away usually by around 3 months or so, except in Lyme. There is a pattern where they can continue in Lyme, and there's a big debate over what that means. Many of us basically think that the reason this happens is due to a phenomenon called epitope switching, where the proteins that live on covering the Lyme germ, they're embedded in a layer of fat, and they can move around in that fat, and they can pop in and out of that fat. And basically, because of that, what the germ looks like is always changing. And what we think is that the immune system gets confused and keeps thinking it's seeing a new infection, and therefore it keeps making the IgG antibodies, okay? So if you had an IgM antibodies. If you have an IgM test that comes back positive, therefore it means either you just had acute Lyme and it's still in you, or that you have Lyme still living in you and it's a chronic infection and it's there just flipping its proteins around, okay? That's IgM, okay? IgG test, now what an IgG antibody is, again, is an antibody that occurs after the IgMs go away, IgGs begin, all right? And when an IgG occurs, they become a part of the permanent attack of the immune system against a germ, and they don't go away. Even when the infection is gone or infection is under control, IgGs will be there, okay? So if somebody has no symptoms of of Lyme, but a positive IgG test, it could mean either it's a false positive test or their immune system did what it was supposed to do and got rid of the germ and they don't have Lyme anymore, okay? So an IgG, though, if it is positive, predicts Lyme if you have it, that ability for it to predict if you have Lyme goes up depending on the number of symptoms and the physical manifestations you have of the infection. There's something in medicine we call predictive value of a test. And what that means is when a test comes back positive, how good is it at predicting that you actually have the problem? Okay, all right. The predictive value, the ability for that test to be truly positive and accurate, determining you have an illness, goes up with the degree of illness that you have, or the number of symptoms you have, and the severity of having it. Okay, so if there's a lot of symptoms of Lyme and you have a positive IgG test, it is probably a positive test. Okay, all right, it probably is accurate. Now, in terms of what's called the sensitivity and the specificity of the IGenex testing method, okay? Sensitivity means what's the ability of the test to find the infection if you have it. And for their Western blot, it's around 80%. In other words, their test will find it about 80% of the time. This is based on internal validation studies that they did, okay? All right. Now, the specificity, the ability of this test to be correct when it comes back positive, is about 95%. Okay, so that's pretty high, actually. So I think that probably answers your question. Okay, but I would say it only is meaningfully positive if you have a number of symptoms suggesting that it could be Lyme disease. Okay, all right. And again, keep talking this over with your physicians as well too. Okay, good luck to you. Hello, Gail again. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I've had 2 Lyme doctors tell me they think hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT, would help me. I have Lyme and BART. I have horrible Raynaud's and erythromelalgia in my toes. Also chronic sores on toes from vascular issues. Small fiber neuropathy in various places. Cheek, tongue, feet, toes. What is your opinion on hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Can it kill BART? Is BART aerobic or anaerobic? Thank you. All right. So hyperbaric oxygen, everyone, or hyperbaric oxygen therapy basically means going into a tank and having pressure applied in that tank while you're breathing in about 100% oxygen. Okay. The strongest way of doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy is to do what's called a dive in a hard tank, a hard shell tank, because they can get up to a pressure of about 2.4 atmospheres. And that 2.4 atmospheres of pressure seems to give the best treatments. Okay. Now, there's 2 things that hyperbaric oxygen might do in Lyme disease. One, with the Lyme germ itself, it might kill the germs. All right. It could. I will tell you, though, that based on a history of using hyperbaric oxygen therapy that was really popular in the world of Lyme maybe about 10 years ago, most of us, after trying with our patients over time, gave up on it. It just did not seem to do that good of a job. Okay? Excuse me here a minute. So I would not look at it as a good germ killer for either BART or even Lyme. That's just not what I would look at it. I would not use it for somebody in that kind of capacity, all right? But there is something else that hyperbaric oxygen can do, and that is it's useful for helping heal sores, all right, like you've got there. In fact, one of the things that it's used a lot for is in people with diabetes and they have skin sore problems. It can be useful for treatment for that. It can also be useful treatment for neurologic manifestations and neuropathies possibly too. So I can't tell you, Gail, what to do because, again, I can't be a physician to you. That would be called practicing medicine without a license here in Austin. But what I can tell you is that, yes, it is something that can be helpful in neurologic conditions and can be helpful in skin issues. In my own practice experiencing using it as a germ killer, I did not find it to be that effective. Okay. In fact, let me tell you a story about that. So they're out in Chico, California. They used to have one of the biggest hard shell chambers on the West Coast. And I believe the physician that ran that tank, there was Lyme within his family as well, too. A number of years ago, after trying to use it to treat Lyme for a number of years, he actually wound up just selling it and sold it to the hospital. And that hospital there now is actually using it to treat skin disorders cases. I think he got rid of it just because, again, it just never really proved to be that great germ killer that many of us were hoping it would wind up being. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Barbara. Let's see. Is it important to detox for parasites before starting to treat Lyme? And if so, is Mimosa pudica seed a good and effective tool to use? I read somewhere that one should try not to do parasite detox on one's own in the event parasites are nested in the brain, die off, and can't be removed. What would complicate matters? Thank you for sharing your wisdom as always. All good wishes. So Barbara, all I can reflect is what I used to do in my practice. Okay. As you know, I'm not practicing here and I'm not licensed to practice medicine in Texas. All right. But I can talk about what I did in my practice in Seattle, where I am still licensed there, actually. So in terms of treating for parasites, the only parasites that I would treat for would be parasitic infections of the intestinal tract. Okay. I am not a big believer, like I know one of my colleagues in Seattle is, of Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, that there can be parasites throughout the body. The only parasite that I know can be throughout the body in the world of Lyme actually is Babesia. Babesia, the co-infection Babesia, is a blood parasite, okay? But in terms of other parasites that some people say can get throughout the body, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I don't see the manifestations of that, nor do I see help in treating it either, okay? All right. But there can be intestinal parasites, all right? And in my approach to treating for intestinal parasites, and I can show you an article where you can read more about that because I describe both herbal and prescription options for that. I wouldn't do any detox work at all. I would just go ahead and treat because getting rid of the parasite itself is going to put an end to all the toxins that they might be releasing, okay? So let me show you an article that I have written about that so you can see more what I mean when I'm talking about parasites and the approaches that I was using in my practice in Seattle. All right, bear with me here a minute. So take a look at this article that says when and how to treat parasites in Lyme disease. Okay, all right. And you can find it in my infection treatment plans chapter here. Okay, all right. All right. Hold on here a minute, everyone. I got to deal with something. All right. Let's see here. All right. Hello, Yvonne. Let's see here. 2 unrelated questions. Can you use otobabark tincture with pill form of cat's claw, or do they both need to be tinctures? The cat's claw we have is not TAO free. 2, have you ever tried using a VIP with regard to the shoemaker's protocol? Neil Nathan's recent book indicates it can be used earlier in treatment. Okay, so let's start with the first part. So yes, you can use a pill form of one and a tincture form of the other. I have no problem with that. My preference has been to use tincture varieties because I think they're stronger. Okay, that's just what my preference has been. But for some reason, if you can't tolerate a tincture variety, then using a pill form would be fine. Okay. I'm not aware of anyone that is making the Otoba in a pill form, and I think that's probably why you're only finding it in a tincture variety. Okay, all right. Then VIP stands for vasoactive intestinal peptide. That's the fancy name for it. And so it's something that's naturally made within our intestines. And Shoemaker has it as part of his treatment, part of the last thing you might try in his approach for something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Okay. Now, I am not a big believer in his chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And so therefore, I have used the VIB before, but I don't see much benefit from it. All right. In the world of Lyme. All right. Now, it may be useful in somebody that had mold toxicity illness. That was the first thing that got them sick, and they don't have something else living in them that sets up chronic inflammation. All right. But so let's talk about that a little bit. Okay. So Richie Shoemaker, many of you may be familiar with him. Dr. Shoemaker is a physician that came up with the idea and developed the science behind the idea that there is something called mold toxicity syndrome. All right. And what Shoemaker was able to show us through genetic studies is that about 25% of people have a genetic predisposition where when they breathe in, eat in, or drink in mold toxins from their environment, their bodies are set up in a way that they can't break those mold toxins down, and they basically get trapped inside the person. Okay. Now, what is supposed to happen in 75% of us, and what does happen, is those toxins get absorbed into our bloodstream. And inside the bloodstream, they get tagged by the immune system to get broken down, and they get broken down. But if you're one of the 25% under Shoemaker's mold toxin illness scenario, if you're one of the 25%, your immune system doesn't correctly tag those toxins. They go to the liver as a fat-based toxin. The liver is supposed to transform something that's fat-based into water-based and then move it out into the intestines. And in a water-based form, it's supposed to mix in our poop and get pooped out. Okay. But what happens, though, is that the liver isn't able to transform those mold toxins from a fat base to a water toxin. So they get moved out into the intestines still as a fat toxin, and they get reabsorbed by the bloodstream back into the blood. And they just keep recirculating, okay? And what they are is they're directly hurt nerve function in the body, but they also trigger a huge excess amount of inflammation in the immune system, where the immune system releases a lot of inflammatory chemicals called cytokines. All right. Now, many of you know from listening to my webinars that the way that I described Lyme disease symptoms is that the majority of Lyme disease symptoms are actually symptoms of too many cytokines. All right. So your brain fog, your insomnia problems, the hormonal dysfunction, the hurting all over, the confusion, etc. The symptoms you get from Lyme disease are really too many cytokines. Due to too many cytokines, it's a cytokine excess syndrome. Mold toxin illness causes the same exact thing. All right. Now, what Shoemaker teaches is that if you clear out your mold toxins by putting somebody on binders to bind all those mold toxins up in the intestines so they can't get reabsorbed again, eventually you pull enough of them out that way that a person should get well. And if they don't get well and their mold toxins are gone, then what Shoemaker says is that there must be having Lyme in you must have triggered a chronic inflammation response. All right. And what Shoemaker then says, he goes through different approaches to methodologically going through one layer of inflammation, trying to get that one corrected, then going to the next layer, then the next layer. Okay. The problem is that chronic inflammatory syndrome and Lyme, they just don't work, because I've tried doing all of his steps in somebody that has Lyme, and I never got anyone better other than getting rid of the mold toxins. All right. So he recommends the second step, making sure you don't have something called Marcon's infection in the nose. And although I tried getting rid of it in all kinds of people, I might get rid of it. They didn't really get better. So I had to go to the second level. Okay. But the majority of people with Marcon's, you can't get rid of it anyhow. You get rid of it for a while and it comes right back. All right. So I don't even believe in treating Marcon's, because I've come to believe it is more just a common bacteria that happens to live there and probably does not cause any problems based on the responses that I saw. Okay. Now, many steps down in the Shoemaker protocol, after you fix this and then fix this and then fix this, down here, the last step, if you're not doing better, is to use the VIP. Okay. Nathan is saying you should use it higher up. Maybe that's so. Okay. But here's what my problem is with all of it. Shoemaker does not believe in chronic Lyme disease. And I think that the reason the chronic inflammatory response syndrome approach that he has does not work in Lyme is that the thing that keeps people inflamed is having chronic Lyme infection. And that until you clear that, until you get it under well enough control, it doesn't matter what you do with all these additional steps, okay? I do think his theory may work in people that just have mold that set everything off to begin with, and they don't have a chronic Lyme infection with it, all right? But if you happen to have a chronic Lyme infection with it, those additional steps in the Shoemaker protocol are just not going to be effective in the majority of people, all right? That's what my experience told me, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Yvonne. Thanks for that question. Hello, hi, Dr. Ross. My husband's Lyme literate medical doctor just started him on thymosin alpha-1 injections to stimulate his immune system. He has been seriously ill with Lyme, BART, BABS, HGA, and probably more for many years. We are noticing small improvements. Do you have any experience with this therapy? Our understanding is it is similar to ProBoost, but in a bioidentical human form. Thanks. I don't have experience using it, so I can't really comment on it, okay? What I can comment on is the ProBoost. And the ProBoost, basically, everyone, is ProBoost is a brand name of something that is called thymus gland protein A. So all of us have in our chest an immune system organ called the thymus gland, okay? That's very active when we're children, and as adults it shrinks up and is really just not that active at all, okay? It releases, one of the things it releases is thymus gland protein A or thymic protein A. And that protein A is supposed to turn on your immune system's cellular immunity, which are the cells that fight infections, okay? All right. So I have found it useful, especially in virus season, to help stop virus infections when somebody would get them, to use this product called ProBoost. I have occasionally added it into my treatment of chronic virus infections. It's one of the things I recommend for the treating chronic and virus infections if I decide to treat chronic virus infections, or when I've decided to treat them in the past, that is, when I was practicing in Seattle. But in terms of being something that I find useful for treating chronic Lyme infection or the co-infections in chronic Lyme, it isn't something that I've used as part of my treatment approach. So anyhow, those are my comments on that. Okay. I'll do a quick screen share here, everyone, so you can see some more information here about that, ProBoost, and also about treating chronic viruses. So over at my Lyme disease information website, take a look at my online treatment guide. In the infection treatment plan section, where is it? I'm trying to find it here. Just a minute. Oh, it's there somewhere. Hold on here a minute. There it is. So this is my article about chronic virus infections and Lyme disease. And I talk here about how do you figure out if they really are a problem, because most of us cohabitate with chronic viruses. They don't cause us a problem. Just finding them does not mean you need to treat them. We've got to decide if they are a problem. And I lay out a way of doing that here. But in terms of one of the things you can use to treat them, I mentioned the thymic protein A down here, okay? I also have a whole article about that thymic protein A. It's this article called Thymic Protein A, okay? Of which you can read about that as well too, okay? All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Deborah. Let's see. Greetings from Toronto. Greetings back. Let's see. Thank you for all your help and support. If your amylase decreases on Malarone, does there need to be an adjustment on the dose 2 tab per day? Not that I'm aware of. I haven't. When I was practicing, first of all, I didn't see that happens. I should say that to begin with. I need to do a little bit of a literature search to find out if it is a problem. But off the top of my head, I don't see where that has any relationship and that you would need to correct for the Malarone. But I have to tell you, don't take that as solid advice, because this is something I would need to investigate a little bit further. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Thanks for that question. Hello, Tamara. Let's see. I am ORH blood type. Should anything be done different about my testing or treatment because of my blood type? I also carry MTHFR. I haven't seen blood type make any difference in terms of treatment. All right, that was my observation when I was treating Lyme from 2004 through 2018 until last year in Seattle. Okay, so the answer is I don't think it makes any difference at all, even if you're carrying the MTHFR. Okay, all right. So MTHFR, everyone, is a problem. Stands for methytetrahydrofolate reductase. It is an enzyme that is used at the beginning steps of a detox pathway to ultimately lead to the creation of glutathione. All right. And glutathione is the master detox chemical made in every one of our cells, and also the master fix-it chemical. It's made to fix anything that damages the cell, basically. Anyhow, there are some people that have a defect in that, so therefore they might have some detox problems. But again, I haven't seen any relationship with blood type in that. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Misty. Let's see. Thank you for this opportunity. You're welcome. I have a two-part question. I tested positive for Lyme earlier in the summer and did the 3-week protocol of doxy. Misty, there isn't a second part here. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here we are. Sorry, I'm new to the webinar. Yeah, no problem. Let's see. I am still having symptoms after the 3-week protocol of antibiotics. My question is, should I do another round of antibiotics to ensure I have fully treated my body in the early stages of diagnosis? And if so, do you have any recommendations for a layered approach? All right. So what I can reflect a couple things. So there's different guidelines out there, as you know. The Infectious Disease Society of America used to call for 3 weeks of treatment. All right. Now they're calling just for 2 weeks of treatment in their proposed new guidelines. The English have a guideline set out that call for 3 weeks of treatment, and if somebody is still symptomatic, they call for an additional 3 weeks of treatment. That's called the NICE protocol, NICE. Okay. ILADS calls for basically up to 2 months straight of treatment for somebody that has Lyme if needed. All right. So based on those two guidelines, the NICE guidelines as well as the ILADS guidelines, I would say it's safe to say treat longer. Okay. That's based on what those guidelines say. It's also what I found based on my experience when I was treating Lyme disease in Seattle. Okay. The other thing I would do in Seattle, if I did the 3 weeks of doxycycline and somebody was symptomatic, I would start asking questions to see, is there an active co-infection? All right. So how you're going to figure that out, I would talk to your physician, but as background for this, take a look at articles I have about how to diagnose Babesia and how to diagnose Bartonella. And usually you're going to figure out if you have those based on symptoms, okay? In both of those articles that I have, I go through a symptom list that will help you figure out, could it be Bartonella, could it be Babesia? If it is, talk to your physician about expanding treatment to pick up those germs, okay? I would suggest that, but you need to talk with your physician about that, okay? All right, now, the other thing you might consider that I would do with my patients in Seattle when I was treating there, if I did not find it was a co-infection that was keeping them sick, then what I would do is I would make sure that there was coverage for, as I retreated again, I would consider to make sure that I was using something to pick up the cyst form of the Lyme germ, all right? So the Lyme germ exists in a person in 3 forms. There's the spirochete that looks like a corkscrew, okay? There is Lyme that lives inside of cells called intracellular Lyme, and there's also the microscopic cyst form of the germ. Doxycycline picks up the spirochete, and it also picks up intracellular Lyme, but it's probably missing the cyst form. A simple way that I'd like to go after the cyst form was to introduce an herb called grapefruit seed extract. It's a 250 milligram pill twice a day. But again, all these ideas are things you should talk over with your physician, okay? Because I can't be a doctor. I'm just giving you, reflecting what I did in my practice that I found successful when I was in Seattle, okay? All right. Good luck to you. Oh, let me just show you one thing here real quick. Okay, so take a look at the How to Diagnose chapter. And there's an article I have on, is it Bartonella? There's also an article I have on how to diagnose Babesia. Okay, take a look at both of those in terms of trying to help figure out, do you possibly need to consider adding treatment to cover those? Okay, all right. And then in terms of treatments to cover cyst Lyme, take a look at, in the infection treatment plans chapter, take a look at this article, a Lyme disease antibiotic guide. And in here, all the way, I actually added a full video now. I have a whole video portion of this that describes it too. So if you don't want to read, you can listen, okay? And but the thing is, in terms of treatments for cyst, you can read through this list, families of Lyme disease antibiotics, and I put in here the forms that are possibly treated, okay? The group of antibiotics that tends to do the best against cyst would be these called the azoles or grapefruit seed extract. Those would be my first lines, okay? All right. Now, the other thing I would say, though, if you decided it might be Bartonella that you have, then what I would do to pick up the cyst form is to actually use a rifamycin like rifampin, because rifampin can treat the cyst form of Lyme. Oh, I got a mistake there. It should say intracellular Lyme. But anyhow, it can treat the cyst form of Lyme, as well as with a tetracycline becomes a full Bartonella treatment as well too. Okay? All right. All right. Back here. All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Todd. Let's see. Hope you are well. What do you think about the tincture from Beyond Balance called MC Bar 1 for Bartonella? Have you used this product in your practice for a challenge test or have any positive results from treating BART? Would sida be better suited for a challenge test and treatment? So I've looked at the MC bar, and when I look at what's in it, I don't see in it true Bartonella germ killers. What is in it tends to be herbs that I would call ones that support the immune system, okay? And it's my impression that to get rid of Bartonella, not only do you need to do things to actually support the immune system, but you need to kill it, okay? So the germ killers that I find effective herbally would be a combination of houttuynia and sida acuta. And I write about those in my How to Kills Bartonella, a Brief Guide article that you may be aware of, okay? I'll show it to you here in a minute. But I've looked at the ingredients, and I know a number of my practitioners out there are using it, and they're using it to provoke and see what happens. But I just think it's a little bit of hokey pokey on that, okay? I just don't think it's the greatest science and greatest approach. In other words, using it to challenge to see if somebody has it based on what happened symptoms-wise, I just don't agree with that approach when it comes to Bartonella, okay? I would look at adding, what I would do in my practice is do things to support the immune system and in addition, kill the germ, okay? So let me show you an article that you can take a look at about that. All right. right, so take a look. The article I have is called Kills Bartonella, a Brief Guide. And here's the information I have. It's under my tier 3 approach for houttuynia and the sida acuta. Okay? All right. All right. Thanks for that question, Todd. Good luck to you. Hello, Missy. Let's see. Sorry, I'm new to the webinars and accidentally hit. Oh, let's see. I'm still having symptoms of 3-week. Oh, we already answered that one. You're seeing me do. There's some people that write their questions twice, thinking that maybe I didn't get it. So I have to read through just enough to see is it a repeat question or not. So anyhow, that's what I was doing there. All right. Hello, Alexandra. Let's see. Hi, doctor. What would be your approach in the scenario of someone that has been infected for 1.5 years and treated with antibiotics since the beginning? What would be your approach? That person had been having elevated liver enzymes. Would you be afraid of liver failure and stop treating with antibiotics? Note that this person uses several liver detox products such as milk thistle. All right. So, Alexander, it's hard for me to say. There's a lot of questions I need to ask here. The one comment I would make, and I cannot give you a thorough answer, okay, because I need to ask a lot more information. Although you tried to give me some information, it's just not enough, all right? The main thing I always make sure of when I've got somebody with a chronic liver enzyme elevation, there's 2 things I would point out about it. Number one, the most effective way I found to support the liver was not milk thistle, was actually giving a person glutathione. There's 2 types of liver detox phases. There's phase 1, phase 2. Okay, all right. And phase 1 liver detox, things go into the chemical pathways and reactions. And actually, they go through phase 1, they come out more toxic than when they went in, okay? Then they go through phase 2, all right? So many people have a blockage of phase 1 to phase 2. Milk thistle tends to be a better supporter of phase 1. So if you're taking milk thistle and you've got toxic problems and liver toxin problems, elevated liver enzymes, and if you happen to be a person that has a blockage in phase 1 to phase 2, you're actually making the problem worse. Okay? All right. What I prefer to use, excuse me here. What I preferred to use in my practice was to do something that supported phase 1 and phase 2, and that's to use glutathione. All right. And if you're going to do it orally, you want to make sure that you're doing something that's a liposomal variety. That means it's microscopically wrapped in fat, because that has a tendency to increase absorption. In fact, Research Nutritionals has done some studies on their products showing that they actually get pretty good elevation, increased amounts of glutathione inside red blood cells when they measure it. Okay, so that liposomal, meaning microscopically wrapped in fat, increases the absorption of it. Okay. All right. So anyhow, you want to do a liposomal variety, though, basically, to get absorbed. And if I had somebody that had elevated liver enzymes, I would try to get them on at least 5 milliliters twice a day of that product by Research Nutritionals. Their liposomal glutathione. It's called Trifortify is their product. Okay. I might do that for a month or 2. Okay. Now, the second thing I want to make you aware of, there are some people that can have that I've observed, that have a Lyme hepatitis, actually. And that means that the Lyme infection itself is inflaming the liver, and that until you actually start treating them with antibiotics, that liver elevations aren't going to go better. I've seen it happen a number of times in my practice, okay? The third point, and I said there were 2 points I was going to, there's actually 3 points I want to make. Some of the medicines we use to treat Lyme can inflame the liver, all right? So the azoles that I was telling you about, and the rifamycin that I had in my article there, those are known to inflame the liver, all right? So you want to make sure you're not, if you've got liver inflammation problems, you want to make sure you're not taking things that are also known to inflame the liver as well, too, okay? All right. Those are just 3 comments, okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Kathy. Let's see. If a person is negative on the Western blot but has chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, migraine, headaches, and no energy, would you recommend further tests for Lyme-associated disease? Where in Texas would you go to find a good Lyme-literate doctor? These symptoms have persisted for 12 years. All right. So one thing I would do in terms of trying to see who's here, because there's a number of practitioners, I believe. I don't know her name, but I believe there's a physician up in Marble Falls. There is a Wally Taylor, Dr. Wally Taylor here in Austin, and I believe there is somebody down in Houston and maybe somebody up in Denver now that are ILADS trained physicians or part of ILADS, the International Lyme Associated Society, to find out who they are. Contact ILADS, go to ilads.org. That's the Professional Society for Physicians that Treat Lyme, okay? And go to their contact page. And at least in their old website, I believe still on their news website, to the contact page, there's a way you can click through there to send them your name so that they will then supply you with the name of ILADS doctors down in this area. Okay, that's what I would wind up doing. The other thing I would say is that symptom complex, what I found in my practice in Seattle, Washington, that around 30% of the time that somebody had chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, that it was actually Lyme disease is the cause based on positive Western blot testing. Okay. Now, you can keep in mind that Western blot testing can be negative if you've done it through IGenex. Still 20% of the time you could still have Lyme. And so diagnosing Lyme requires looking at 4 things. And I mentioned those earlier. You don't need positive testing to say you have Lyme if you have enough of those other issues going on that I mentioned in that article. So take a look at that article. Okay. All right. And yes, there are additional tests that could be done, and any of those Lyme literate doctors down here in Texas could help you with that. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Cindy. Let's see. Hope you had a good trip. Yes, I did. I don't know how many of you know this, but the reason I wasn't here last week is I chose, as part of my move, to actually ride my motorcycle from Austin up to Seattle. So I was on the road for 8 days. I kind of did a circuitous route. I actually went to Colorado Springs. Then I cut across the center of Nevada, center of Utah into the center of Nevada on US 50. And believe me, when you're out there, you can be in the middle of nowhere. Riding my motorcycle through these valleys and there's nothing around. It was pretty incredible. Got up to Reno and then into wine country in California and then out to the California coast and rode up into the southern Oregon coast and eventually cut up to Portland and then up to Seattle. It was a good trip. I like going out and riding my motorcycle on long trips like that. I was very fatigued, though, by the time I got back here. I flew back on Monday. And while I was up in Seattle, I was able to work on getting myself back. I found a place to live and in the initial stages of negotiating over a clinical space up there as well, too. So, yes, it was a good trip. Thank you. Let's see. Diagnosed with Lyme last month, though symptomatic for around 18 months now. In the 3rd week of doxy, for a couple months now, I seem to have waves of mild nausea off and on most days. That feeling is in my head, not in my stomach. Can this be part of Lyme or co-infections? Thank you. Cindy, I would need to ask you a little bit more. I'm not quite sure what you mean by nausea, but in your head. I would need to ask some qualifying questions. The one thing I would point out is that doxycycline, the longer you're on it, can actually give stomach irritation and lead to nausea. So if this is truly like an upset of any kind in your stomach, then it could be medicine related. And those are the comments I can make. I would need to ask you a lot more to find out, to be able to give you a more direct answer on that. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hold on here a minute. Hello, Camellia. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I've been diagnosed with Lyme almost 2 years ago and treated with a 2-month round of IV Rocephin after doing 1 month of doxy. I'm currently not doing any Lyme treatments, just trying to build up my immune system. My thyroid levels have been off the chart in the last year since dealing with Lyme. High TSH levels on and off. Could this be an indication that Lyme is still active? Is there a connection between thyroid Hashimoto's and Lyme? I still have various symptoms on and off. Thank you for all your help. So first of all, to answer your question, I would need to do some thyroid testing. I would need to know a little bit more what's happening, okay? And keep in mind that elevated TSH is a chemical that's made by the brain that talks to your thyroid glands and says, make your stuff, okay? And if the brain, an area of the brain called the hypothalamus pituitary, interprets that there's not enough thyroid, then it releases higher amounts of TSH to tell your thyroid to make enough thyroid, all right? So elevated TSH could mean that you have low thyroid. And low thyroid could give you achiness, fatigue, confusion, all of that stuff, okay? So I would need to know a little bit more about all of your testing, all right? Now, can Lyme lead to interference of how the thyroid works? Yes, it can. And that is, if Lyme is still active in you, it triggers the immune system to overproduce a group of inflammatory chemicals called cytokines. And those cytokines can interfere with correct functioning of the hypothalamus pituitary, okay? So could there be a relationship with Lyme? Yes. Could Lyme still be active in you? Maybe, but I can't say based upon what you just said here. I would need to ask a lot of questions and do some blood testing to help sort through that, okay? I would go back and talk to your physicians again and see what they think, okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Barry. Good evening, Dr. Ross. My wife has neurologic Lyme, BART and Babesia, and has zero energy. Her thyroid test came back as normal TSH, T4 normal, T3 low. She started Armour Thyroid 30 milligrams last week. She was subsequently tested for reverse T3, and it was normal. Should she continue with the thyroid meds? Barry, again, I would love to answer that, but I can't. The reason is it's a direct medical question, and if you've noticed what I've been doing tonight, I've just described generally what things I've seen in my practice. I'm not licensed to practice here in Texas, and so I can't do that. If somebody's listening in and I were to answer that directly, I would be in trouble. So I'm sorry. I would go back and talk to your physicians about that again. Okay, all right. There's actually reasons on both sides of the argument as to whether to continue the Armour Thyroid or not. That's what I can tell you. But I would go back and talk to them again. Okay? All right. Now, after I move back to Seattle another month, I'm licensed and I'd be able to give you more of a direct answer to that. Okay. Hello, Tamara. Let's see. I had a dry bite by a viper in 2013 and became very ill from bacterial infection. Can you get Lyme or other co-infections from a snake bite? What tests would you suggest to figure this out? So I have not seen any scientific evidence that snakes can transmit Lyme. Okay, I just haven't seen it anywhere. There's good evidence that ticks can. There is some other evidence that show that other vectors can carry Lyme. It's not clear that they transmit it, though, and those would be mosquitoes, fleas, mites, and biting flies. There's Polish studies that show that all of those vectors can carry Lyme. Doesn't prove they transmit it, though, okay? Clinically, I have seen somebody that had severe mosquito bites that came down with acute Lyme afterwards. And so that has me believing that other vectors can carry it. I just have not seen any science behind the idea that snakes can do it. Okay? All right. Nor do I have any experience with that either. All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Yvonne. Let's see, 2 unrelated questions. One, we already answered that earlier. Hello, Paula. Let's see. Does Babesia symptoms come and go? Um, I have had patients in my practice where they might have predominant Babesia symptoms that would suddenly go away and then come back. However, my experience was that the majority of the time they had Babesia symptoms and that these were just little breaks in it, basically. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Paula. Hello, Mo. Let's see. Does it make sense to get the urine test to see what mold toxins you have? Does the Great Plains test work just as good as real time? Is half the price. So, in my opinion, I liked getting the mold toxin urine test to get some evidence that there are actually mold toxins there. Okay, that's one reason to do them. And as you're treating, then you can follow the levels to see, are you getting somewhere, basically. All right. That's one reason to do them. Okay. Second reason to do them is that there is a way to use your binders, the binders that you choose, based upon what the toxins are. All right. So, for instance, activated charcoal works better on certain toxins than on other ones, and bentonite clay works better on some, and cholestyramine works maybe on all of them. Okay. All right. So you may get some help picking the right binder for the actually toxins that are in you. Okay. If you want more information about that, specifically which toxins, which binders, take a look at my article on mold toxicity at Treat Lyme. I actually lay it out in there, which binders may work better for which toxins. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of, there are two labs out there right now that are testing for mold toxicity illness. One is real time, and the other is the Greater Smoky or the Great Plains lab. Okay. Real time looks to see if you have toxins, 15 kind, that get grouped into 4 categories. Okay. Their technique is to use a test method called an ELISA, which is a way of basically seeing if you can attach things to the mold toxins. Okay. All right. The technique that Great Plains is using is gas chromatography. So they're measuring the gas of these toxins. Actually, it's a different way of measuring things. As to which one's better, I don't know clinically, because when I left practice a year ago, it was the real-time labs that I was using. And so that's the experience I have. When I get back into practice, I'm going to be interested in working with both so I can get a better clinical sense of which one may be more effective and more accurate. I've been having these discussions with some of my provider colleagues as well, too, and it's still not clear as to are they both as accurate and useful as the other. I just don't know. Okay. All right. And yes, the Great Plains is a less expensive lab. I would wonder if we may see real time eventually start reducing the cost of its lab, given the fact that Great Plains is got theirs priced so much lower. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question, Mo. Hello, Maria. Let's see. Good evening, Dr. Ross. I have treated for bartonella almost 11 months, and I do not believe I have any more symptoms besides pain in my heel some mornings. I have a lot of Lyme symptoms. I'm not treating for those because my doctor told me that my treatment for mold toxicity will kill Lyme. Do you suggest I treat for Lyme? Shall I continue taking the sida, acuta, and houttuynia while treating Lyme if you suggest it? And let's see, there's 2 other parts here. You said, I'm only doing and have done herbal treatment. And then how long do you recommend treating for mold toxicity? Okay, so generally my approach when I was treating was to treat for bartonella for 4 to 6 months based on symptom resolution. And if the symptoms resolved, then I would stop treating. And my experience was 95% of the time, bartonella will be gone for good and it won't come back. Okay. So based on what you've suggested here, You've treated long enough for bartonella. That's my opinion. Okay. And I would stop. If you were my patient in Seattle, I would have stopped treating for it by now. All right. Now, in terms of this issue of mold toxicity in Lyme, the problem with Lyme and mold toxicity is they look identical. All right. And what I have found in my practice is if I had somebody that had a strong history of mold toxicity, and I could tell from their history that it was the mold toxicity that led to their illness, I would tend to detox them first and then see if I still needed to treat the Lyme or not. And let me explain why I say that, which is different than what your provider is saying, right? Treating mold toxins does not kill Lyme, right? Treating mold toxins basically removes those toxins from your body so they're no longer making you sick and triggering your immune system to make too many cytokines, all right? And sometimes what you'll find is when you've removed those mold toxins, even though you may still test positive for Lyme, it's not the Lyme that is causing your excess cytokines, and it's not the Lyme that's making you sick. It may mean the Lyme is still in you, but it may mean that once you remove the mold toxin illness, there is no more illness to treat, all right? Which raises another question. When somebody has a Lyme infection in them, do we always need to treat the infection by trying to kill it? And the answer I say is no. We use antibiotics, herbal or prescriptions, only to knock the germ load down enough that the immune system can keep it under control. If you're already at a place where your immune system is keeping it under control, there is no reason to go after it with antibiotics, okay? So I hope that answers your question. So for instance, I had a patient that came to see me once that, and I could give you other stories like this too, but it was a guy that came to see me that had seen another Lyme doctor in town that was told he immediately needed to get on IV antibiotics for his Lyme disease because he was getting brain damage, basically. In his story, he had been sick for a few years, had a lot of symptoms suggesting Lyme and mold toxinellas because they can look alike. So I just started asking him about where he lived and what he was doing when he got sick. And it became very clear to me right away that he got sick when he moved into the house that he soon discovered had black mold on the walls. I mean, it was a clear story. Healthy, moves into house, discovers 2 weeks later or a month later black mold and is sick, all right? And he has a positive Lyme test, all right? So what I chose to do in that situation was to never address the Lyme, but rather put him on binders and put him on things to lower cytokines and help support detox. And within about 6 months, he had regained 90% of his health, and within the year, he was back to full-time employment after having not worked for a few years at all, okay? We never had to do anything to treat the Lyme infection because his immune system was dealing with that. All we needed to do was get the mold toxins out that were causing most of his problems, okay? All right. So that's what I would suggest, or that's how I handled him. And therefore, as I discuss mold toxin illness with people, I always talk about when you have Lyme and mold toxin illness, try to figure out what came first and go after that. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Maria. All right, everyone. That is it for me for tonight. You probably know I'm out of water. I've got a really scratchy throat here tonight, probably from my motorcycle trip. Anyhow, we have another one of these next week. I hope you'll join me then. In tomorrow's email, you'll be able to click on a link to sign up for next week's webinar as well, too. And then keep in mind, I'm going to probably be off for a month as I navigate getting this house up to Seattle. Okay? All right. And we'll see. I mean, it depends on how quickly I'm able to get moved in. If I can get set up sooner, I may towards the end of September reintroduce doing the webinars again. But I want to give myself time to get there and get set up. Okay. Good night, everyone. Good seeing you here tonight. Good luck, everyone.